I hope you're liking this book as much as I am. Are you ready for part two? Part two, A Shadow Over Our Valley. Chapter 4, Radio Mula. We were visiting relatives who lived nearby one evening when I heard a strange sobbing on the radio. At first, it sounded like just another imam or religious leader giving advice. Pray daily, he said. The women murmured in approval. Then he began to cry. Stop listening to music, he begged. Stop going to movies. Stop dancing. Stop, he begged. Or God will send another earthquake to punish us all. Some of the women began to cry. Memories of the previous year's earthquake, one of the worst ever to hit our region, fresh in their minds. I wanted to tell them that it wasn't true. An earthquake is explained by science. But the women had no education and were raised to believe their religious leaders, so they were frightened. My father told us not to listen to this man, whom people called the Radio Mullah, which is another word for imam. But my friends at the school began to repeat what he said, almost word for word. All music was haram, said the mullah, which meant that it was forbidden by Islam. Only his radio station was permitted. Men should grow their hair and beards long, he said, and women should stay home in purdah quarters at all times. They should go out only in emergencies and only wearing a burqa and only with a male relative. Many people admired how the mullah talked about the importance of daily prayer. They didn't have faith in our government, which they felt had not helped enough after the earthquake, so they agreed with his idea of bringing back Islamic law. The voice on the radio belonged to Fazula, one of the leaders of the group that helped many people after the earthquake. Now he was using that disaster to make them feel afraid. At home, I began serving tea to my father and the other men so I could continue sitting in on their discussions without being noticed. In those days, there were only two topics of conversation: the Radio Mullah and the fighting just across the border in Afghanistan. For the past several years, the United States and others had been fighting a war to defeat the Taliban government in Afghanistan, which was protecting Al-Qaeda, another dangerous group with similar beliefs. The Taliban. As soon as I would hear that word, I'd think back to the conversation I'd had with my father when we were in Shangla. The Taliban seemed like something far away then, something bad in a distant place. Fazula was connected to the Taliban in Pakistan, and my father warned the other men there would come a day when the Taliban would reach our valley. For the first time, it occurred to me that our world was changing before my eyes, and not for the better. The Radio Mullah cast a dark cloud of fear over our valley. I arrived at school one day to find my friends all huddled in the corner, talking about the radio show the night before. Fazula had announced that schools for girls were haram, forbidden by the Holy Quran. Then, in July 2007, he called for people to rise up in violence against the government. My father said our family should do its best to ignore the mullah's talk. We must live a full life, if only in our hearts, he said. And so, as usual, our dinner conversations were about things of the mind: Einstein and Newton, poets and philosophers, and, as usual, my brothers and I fought over the remote, over who got the best grades, over anything and everything. Then, Fazula joined forces with another Taliban group and announced that women could not go out in public at all. Suddenly, everywhere I looked, the Taliban seemed to spout rumors to sprout like weeds. There were rumors that the Radio Mullah's men were listening at doors. If they heard someone watching TV, which they called a sin, they could bash the door in and then smash the TV to bits. My brothers and I didn't understand how wrestlers with funny names and a little boy with a magical pencil were so bad. But every time there was a knock on the door, we jumped. Eventually, we moved our TV to a closet. Then, if strangers came to the door, they wouldn't see it. How had the mullah gotten so much power? And why was no one prepared to defy him? When Fazula started announcing the names of schoolgirls on his radio show, my mother insisted I never walk to school by myself. She was afraid that I would be seen alone in my school uniform by the Taliban. The Kashal school had fallen under the shadow of the Radio Mullah. Every day, I noticed that a few more of our classmates had stayed at home. One of our teachers told my father that he would no longer teach girls. I shuddered to hear the stories of Fazula's men punishing the men and women who disobeyed him. What was becoming of my city? What would become of us? God, I said when I went to bed, please protect my city and its people. My father went to a meeting to speak out against the Taliban, and after that, he traveled to Islamabad to urge the government to protect its citizens. While he was away, I took on the nightly job of going around the house once, twice, often 3 times, making sure all the doors and windows were locked. Sometimes my father came home quite late. Sometimes he would sleep at a friend's house in case he was being followed. He was protecting us by staying away, but he could not protect us from worrying. Those nights, I heard my mother praying until all hours. My father was a simple school principal, but he was like a falcon, daring to fly where others would not go. My mother was the one with her feet firmly planted on the ground. One day, we found a letter from my father taped to the school gate. Sir, it read, the school you are running is Western and infidel. You teach girls and you have a uniform that is un-Islamic. Stop this or you will be in trouble and your children will weep and cry for you. It was signed Fidayeen of Islam, devotees of Islam. The Taliban had threatened my father. Now I was afraid. The next day, my father replied to the Taliban in a letter to the newspaper. Please don't harm my school children, he wrote, because the God you believe in is the same God they pray to every day. Our phone started ringing that night, friends calling to thank my father for the letter. My father had always been a busy man, but now, each time he left home, I wondered, will he come back? My father decided that our school uniforms would change. Boys would no longer wear the Western uniform of shirt and trousers. They would switch to traditional tunic and pants of the shalwar kameez. I wore my blue and white shalwar kameez, but the Taliban said girls should not wear the white shalwar because then they would look like boys. The uniform I once loved now made me feel like a criminal. Another little poster. What is shalwar kameez? The shalwar kameez is a traditional outfit worn by men and women of all ages. It refers to a pair of long, baggy trousers, the shalwar, which is often paired with a long tunic, the kameez. Specific styles differ by region, but they are all usually made of light material and are quite comfortable. Good to know. Then I thought, what have I done wrong that I should be afraid? All I want to do is go to school, and that is not a crime. That is my right. Besides, I was the daughter of Zuddin Yousafzai, the man who had dared to talk back to the Taliban. I would hold my head high, even if my heart was quaking. Sometimes, when I was feeling afraid, a tiny voice in my heart whispered to me, "Why don't you fight to make Pakistan a better place?" Due to the attention my father was getting, I had been approached by journalists who wanted to hear from a girl about being forbidden from school. I had recently done interviews about girls' education with national TV news channels, and although I had been nervous, I had made it through, and I had liked it. So I told myself, I will continue this fight for peace and democracy in my country. I was only 10, but I knew then that somehow I would find a way. Chapter 5: What Terrorism Feels Like. I was at school one day when we heard a fearsome roaring out from outside. Everyone, students and teachers, ran out to the courtyard and looked up. A swarm of black army helicopters darkened the sky. They whipped the wind around us, stirred up a storm of dirt and sand, and drowned out our voices with their roar. Something had landed on the ground at our feet. Plunk, plunk, plunk. We screamed. Then we cheered. Toffees! Soldiers were tossing candy down to us. We laughed as we caught toffees. Candy was falling from the sky, and peace was on its way. We'd been praying for someone to stand up to Fazullah and his men with their black turbans and big guns. Now our town was swarming with soldiers in green uniforms. Fazullah's men disappeared practically overnight, like snow melting into the ground. But we knew they had not gone far, so Mingora remained a tense and frightened city. Each day after school, my brothers and I would race home and lock the doors. No more playing cricket in the alley, no more hide and seek in the street, no more candy from the sky. One evening, we heard an announcement that we didn't understand. I knocked on the wall to Safina's house so someone could come to our house and explain the word curfew. Safina and her mother and brother told us it meant we had to stay indoors for certain hours of the day and always at night. Later that night, bright white light flashed across the sky and lit up our rooms. Then, boom! A thud shook the ground. My brothers and I ran to our parents, and we all huddled together, shaking as we listened to the bombs drop. Each time we heard a noise, we gripped one another harder until we drifted off to sleep. We hoped that the sound meant the army had defeated the Taliban. My father went to find out what had happened and returned with a frown. Our hearts sank when he told us what he had learned. The Taliban were going to take control of our valley. The fighting between the army and the Taliban raged on for a year and a half. My brothers crowded my parents' bed, so I had to sleep on a pile of blankets on the floor. Even in the middle of a war, I hated that my brothers stole my spot. Strange as it sounds, we got used to the bombings. I often spoke to God from my spot on the floor in my parents' room. Bless us and protect us, I said. I wished for peace for everyone, and especially peace for Swat. I tried to plug my ears and picture my prayers floating up to God. Somehow, we awoke each morning safe and sound. Then, one day, my prayer was answered. The army hadn't won, but it had at least driven the Taliban into hiding, if not away. Our school's doors were not always open during fighting, but when they were, I was there. Once my friends and I moved to the upper school, our friendly competition got even more competitive. We didn't just want to get good grades, we wanted to get top grades. Though we did each want to be the best, what mattered to us most was a teacher's appreciation. Seeing that helped us to think, I am something. For in a country where so many people consider it a waste to send girls to school, a teacher is the one who helps you believe in your dreams. Our upper school headmistress, Madame Miriam, was bright and independent, everything I wanted to be. She had been to college, she had a job earning her own wage. We had our school subjects like algebra, chemistry, and physics, but mostly what we talked about those days was the army and the Taliban. The people of SWAT were caught in the middle. Our friend used to like to annoy me by saying, Taliban is good, army not good. And I always told her that when you are caught between two sides fighting, there is no good. Traveling to and from school had become so frightening. So when I was safe at home, I just wanted to relax. One day, I arrived ahead of my brothers and turned on the TV, but all I got was static. I tried every station, nothing but static. At first, I thought it was a power outage. We'd been having those a lot. But that night, we found out that Fazula's men had switched off all the cable channels, with nothing to watch but the government television channel. We were all but cut off from the outside world. Another day, I found my father with his head in his hands. Oh, honey, he said, the world has gone mad. He told me that Fazula's men had destroyed a girls' school in a nearby town. I felt my heart drop. I could not imagine why anyone would want to rob children of the chance to learn to read and write. Why was a school building such a threat to the Taliban? Please, God, I prayed, help us to protect our valley and to stop this violence. Every day, Fazula's men struck a new target: stores, roads, bridges, and schools. Most of the attacks were outside Mingora, but soon they got closer. One day I was cleaning dishes in the kitchen, and a bomb went off so close that the whole house rattled and the fan over the window fell. I had grown up hearing the word terrorism, but only now did I understand it. Terrorism is different from war, where soldiers face one another in battle. Terrorism is going to sleep at night and not knowing what horrors the next day will bring. It is walking down your own street and not knowing whom you can trust. It is the enemy everywhere and the attacks coming out of nowhere. Our family fell into a routine every time we heard a blast. We called to one another to make sure everyone was safe. Then we listened for the sirens. Then we prayed. Still, this kind of random terror made us do strange things. My father started taking a different route home each evening in case someone was studying his routine. My mother avoided the market, and my brothers stayed inside on even the sunniest days. And since I had been in the kitchen both times blasts were near our house, I stayed as far away from that room as possible. But how can a person live when she is afraid of a room in her own home? Nighttime was the worst. Fazula's men carried out most of their attacks at night, especially the destruction of the schools. In 2008 alone, the Taliban attacked 200 schools. Every morning, before I rounded the corner on the way to the Kashol school, I closed my eyes and said a prayer, afraid to open them in case the school had been reduced to rubble overnight. This was what terrorism felt like. One night, when a blast hit especially close to our home, I went to my father's side. Are you scared now? I asked. At night, our fear is strong, Johnny, he said. But in the morning, the light is new. But in the morning and the light, we find our courage again. And that's the end of part 2.